and it's 1:30. Time for update from the world of business. Fresh from Marrakesh, I bring you Business Incorporated today, and this is what we have for you on the program. We have more reaction on CBN's lifting of ban on the 43 items as the Naira drops further. A big question, is South Africa running out of money? We'll bring you a report capturing that. And we look at the Africa Instability Risk Index just released and some of the implications for countries on the continent. Good afternoon. Welcome to Business Incorporated. I'm Ini John Mekwa. As usual, we delve into the market to see what's happening right there, beginning with the NGX. To see the numbers there, we see a recovery for the NGX, or sustenance of recovery from yesterday right there. The number is 0.13% in the positive, 67%, 415.44. South Africa is on the flip side, almost 1% down, 0.87%. Egypt is on the green side, also 0.47% at intraday, 22,178.49. Kenya closed yesterday in the red, 0.10%, losing that 100 index number that it normally would have, unfortunately. Let's look at the Middle East and see what's going on right there in the markets in the Middle East at intraday. We can tell you that Abu Dhabi was in the negative there, 0.73%. And so was Dubai. Dubai is even worse there at 1.38%. Saudi Arabia, positive 0.21%. And Qatar, negative 0.79% at intraday. Well, let's head to London now and talk to Juliana and find out what's happening there. Juliana, good to see you on the show. Good afternoon. So, I know in the morning with Ladi, you did talk about the reduction in especially food inflation, even though headline is still sticky. What are reactions and some of the reality of these numbers?
Good afternoon, and it's great to have you back. Yes, CPI data did come in this morning from the Office for National Statistics, showing that inflation in the year to September maintained the rate it was in the previous month of 6.7%. Now, September CPI is always incredibly important for the British government because they use that data to determine whether or not they will put an increase for benefits in April next year. And I think its benefits and those on universal credit, basically those who are struggling the most in society, that campaigners are crying out for this morning, because we are still going through a cost of living crisis. It is bitterly cold in London at the moment, even though we have, of course, had some extreme weather patterns earlier on in the month. And when it is cold, of course, what you want to do is ramp up your heating. But lots of families are still unable to do that because they cannot afford the high bills. And there's a massive difference between where we are this year and where we were last year, because last year we had lots of government support, and it doesn't appear that Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, is prepared to do that, even though, as you quite rightly said at the top, we are seeing a slight fall in grocery price inflation. It's still incredibly high. So month on month, yes, we have seen a dip. In fact, I think we saw the highest dip we've seen in 2 years. If you compare food prices to where they were this time last year, they're about 12.9% higher. If you go back 2 years ago, it's 27% higher than that. I know me and Laddie all week have been talking about inflation, but food price inflation in the UK is 27% higher 2 years prior to what we're seeing. So it is still incredibly difficult. Also, as well, coupled with this, we did have labour market data yesterday suggesting that wage inflation is outstripping CPI. Now, of course, that's good if you're one of the lucky few in this country that are starting to see more money in your back pocket at the end of the month. The only issue of this is that the Bank of England and the Treasury do fear that a rise in wages will fuel inflation, which means a lot of economists are pricing another hike when the Monetary Policy Committee gather at Threadneedle later this month.
Yeah, it doesn't look like we're out of this circle. Just one thing to to the other, just when you thought there was a little bit of hope. But the British Foreign Minister, Mr. James Cleverly, is heading to the Middle East. We know that, the U.S. president also is heading there, already there at this time. But what does he hope to get from this visit?
Yeah, well, it's an incredibly difficult geopolitical situation at the moment, incredibly tense. And of course, Britain standing shoulder to shoulder with Israel and all of its allies are firmly in the middle of this. Just before I came into the studio, it was confirmed that a seventh of Britain has been confirmed dead following that deadly assault from Hamas on Israel nearly 2 weeks ago. 10 British nationals still remain missing and are feared dead, and there are ongoing discussions with the British Foreign Office as to how they can try and get a safe route out of Gaza for the hundreds of Brits who were caught up in this absolute tragedy. Now, of course, we know the stakes are higher following that deadly attack on the hospital in Gaza last night. I think Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has stepped back slightly and is not using some of the terminology that we have heard from the US President Joe Biden, who, of course, is in the region. Going back to what you were saying, yes, during Prime Minister's questions today, it was confirmed that James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, will be visiting the region. In fact, he'll be leaving within the next few hours, and we don't expect him to be in Israel. However, he will be meeting regional bosses in Egypt, Qatar, and in Turkey. However, more importantly, we do believe that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will indeed be travelling with him. We haven't had an update from 10 Downing Street. However, during a media discussion yesterday, a close ally of Israel's leader Benjamin Netanyahu did confirm that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak would be visiting the region. Now, of course, so much has happened. In fact, this war is evolving every minute or so, but we're not certain if after the attack last night the Prime Minister would be travelling. But that is the mood music on the ground, that of course Rishi Sunak will be there. There has been lots of protests in the UK. Got to tell you, in London, certainly more pro-Palestinian voices, and that is a delicate balancing act for the British government alongside the opposition. They remain unified in their stance, which is that Israel does have a right to defend itself. But considering we are seeing a really horrifying humanitarian disaster evolving in front of our eyes, I think the rhetoric from 10 Downing Street has dialed down significantly over the past 24 hours. And I think the priority for the British government is ensuring that aid, which is so desperately needed in the region, can be filtered through. So I think that is the main scope of the travel. And we'll just have to wait and see whether Prime Minister Rishi Sunak does join James Cleverly in the region.
All right, Juliana, well, a whole lot to digest there, the trouble in the Middle East. But let's turn back to your home and find out what's going on with the markets.
Yeah, the markets are not great at the moment. This is all down to some of the data we received as we're talking about inflation data. Still sticky, as you say, at 6.7%. The FTSE All-Share, it's down at intraday by 0.73%. FTSE 100 is down by 0.65%. And the FTSE 250, the domestic market, that's down by triple figures, 1.09%. A lot of this is led by the airlines, of course. A barrel of Brent crude is trading higher on the surge and on the speech, shall I say, from Iran asking for that oil embargo on Israel. That's affected the blue chip index at intraday. In the currencies markets, the British pound is trading up against the US dollar by 0.06%, up 2 against the euro by 0.23%, and up against the Japanese yen by 0.02% at intraday.
All right, Juliana, thank you so much for that. And talking about, of course, the war going on there, since the International Criminal Court in The Hague issued an warrant of arrest for Russian president. We've seen that he hasn't left his country, with the exception of a short trip to Yes, we are done, Juliana. All right, so we're moving over to Berlin now, and we're talking about the visit of President Putin to his friend in Beijing, meeting with the China's president. And we have Lars now to tell us some of the expectations and how, of course, it will affect the EU, the European Union area right there. Lars, good afternoon. So obviously this is an important meeting, having President Putin leave his safe haven, to a place that is his friend, but I mean, we don't even know how safe he is. But what's on the agenda right here?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Well, against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, this is really about showing unity and one strong partnership. Arriving in Beijing, Putin said, quote, "Chairman Xi Jinping calls me his friend, and I call him my friend." Well, Putin more than anyone needs a friend, that's for sure. He doesn't have many left, and that has hurt his country's economy tremendously over the past year and a half. Russia has lost most of its trading partners. Really, only trade with China is going strong, up actually by 30% according to latest numbers. Putin would like these numbers to keep going up, and one item on the agenda in Beijing is discussions over a Russian proposed pipeline through Mongolia dubbed Power of Siberia, which would help redirect Russian gas supplies that had gone to Europe toward China instead. It is a very expensive and time-consuming project, so we'll have to see where that one goes.
All right, so are there already any implications to the war when we look at the economy?
Yeah, indeed. The meeting currently being held in Beijing is on the occasion of the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. That is Xi Jinping's signature achievement. Over the past decade, China has disbursed close to $1 trillion to mostly developing countries, largely in loans, to build power plants, roads, airports, telecommunications networks, and other infrastructure. Beijing spread those projects out across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and parts of Eastern and Southern Europe even. However, there's two problems now. Some of these countries have overspent on their projects and owe China gigantic sums that they can likely not pay back in the long run. And China can't really afford doling out loans like they have done in the past. And that is, of course, due to the country's own economic problems. So it is unclear what the future of the Belt and Road Initiative will look like. But one thing is sure, the project has made China the #1 economic partner for many countries around the world. And it has, in places, put China above the US and the World Bank and changed the power distribution between the West and the East.
All right, let's look at the market now. What are investors doing?
Yeah, staying with China, the United States on Tuesday said it was tightening curbs again on exports of state-of-the-art AI chips to China. That is another step in the ongoing chip war between the two superpowers, in which especially Washington is trying to limit Beijing's ability to gain ground and become a leading tech economy. Other than that, as so often these days, inflation is on everyone's mind. Fresh numbers out of the UK, and they're pointing to 6.7% inflation in September, and that is much hotter than expected. And we know, of course, what that means. Investors are afraid of further monetary tightening by the Bank of England.
Also, thank you so much, Lars Holter, for that update. Just before we take a short break, let's tell you what's happening in the markets in the United States. Stock futures dropped as earnings season gained steam, and Wall Street looked ahead to key financial report. Futures connected to the Dow Jones Industrial Average dipped 110 points, that's about 0.3%. S&P 500 futures and Nasdaq also lost 0.5% each. But let's join Maria Bird, our correspondent in Washington, to give us an update or summary of the markets on Tuesday.
The U.S. stock market closed mostly flat on Tuesday, as the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 were flat. The heavy tech Nasdaq was down at 0.25%, and many investors are watching to see what will happen with the Israel and the Ukrainian wars. These two wars are having an impact on the U.S. stock market, as investors are also watching to see what will happen with the diplomatic efforts between U.S. President Biden and Venezuela to steady oil prices. These two major international efforts are causing much interest about U.S. investors. It is also clear investors are watching to see the stability of the U.S. economy, as retail sales showed a 0.7% increase. This increase means the U.S. economy could be in better shape than was once expected.
Well, thank you, Maria. Let's take a break now. When we come back, we'll stay on the African continent and give you updates, especially the risk index of countries. You're welcome back. Still watching Business Incorporated here in Channels Television. Well, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, Chad, and Sudan present the highest risk for regime change on the continent's countries that have recently seen coups, including Burkina Faso, Gabon, Guinea, and Niger, also stand at the low end of the rankings. Back here in Nigeria, the status is stable. However, key risk items include naira depreciation, multidimensional poverty, security challenges, and political uncertainties. Well, let's talk about this index for countries in Africa and the implication. Joining us from our Abuja studio, Ikemesit Effiong, partner and head research as SBM Intelligence. Hi, Ikemesit, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you. So tell us about your findings as at SBM about these risks. So it's obvious that those countries that have experienced coup in recent times, obviously the risks are high. But what about the issue of macroeconomic factors? How much risk do countries on the continent have or present, from that aspect?
Significant ones, right, as our index, right, the Africa Country Instability Risk Index, or ACIRI as we like to call it, portends. Because what we basically did with the index was we measured every country in sub-Saharan Africa along 4 key macro indicators. So the strength of their economy, the depth and the vitality of their leadership and governance frameworks, the impact on history on emerging and live issues, right? Especially if they have had histories of regime change or economic instability that may feed into regime change, as well as geopolitics and what kind of interest that world powers, especially the superpowers, have in determining outcomes in those countries, and why those macroeconomic indicators are super important, and that's why we put a particular indicator to it, is because those sit at the heart of all of the other indicators, right? Countries that generally tend to do well economically, have stable currencies, have low unemployment and low inflation, generally tend to be more stable. First, they generally tend to be democracies, and generally they tend to be more stable, and there are ordered frameworks around, handing the baton of governance. And so in a situation like you find in a lot of African countries where, currency fluctuations and weakness in the national currency, high unemployment, high inflation, and really depreciation in social outcomes, persist, many actors are likely to be restive and demand, right, for accountability, often through violence and through negative means. And that's why watching the economy and how the economy does is a very good indicator about whether a government is going to stay in power or is going to transition peacefully to another government, or it's likely to be kicked out of the building violently.
So with this information, I guess when countries seek FDIs, investors will certainly look the way of the index. But what are countries supposed to be doing at this time, when they have seen this position? And some of them are not issues, that concern just the country, and they're not issues that can be handled just immediately. So what should they be doing?
Well, if there's any indication that policymakers in any given geography are saying the right things and doing the right things, especially around, managing currency risk, around certainty, around regulation and the business environment, especially in terms of enhancing the ease of doing business, allowing investors to allocate capital efficiently, and sometimes the allocation of capital includes moving capital, right, out of these countries, then that may offer, even if there are certain elements of softness or weakness, right, on certain macroeconomic or social indicators. Investors, international partners, creditors are likely to give, that geography a pass. We've seen with countries like Rwanda, for example, that's doing relatively well, but debt levels are rising. Investors and international partners are willing to give those countries a pass. Zambia is another country, right, that comes to mind in that respect. But where you have a situation where in response to economic challenges, governments double down on protectionism, there are questions, there are questions around the ease with which investors and economic actors in those geographies are able to allocate capital in a way that makes sense to their stakeholders and shareholders, then investors are likely to give a pass. The way we look at it at SBM is this: African countries are generally not in competition with themselves. They are in competition with other members of, the developing world, right, the so-called global south. And there are, more than a few countries right around the world that are developing rapidly, that are doing the right things and are going over and beyond to attract investors and give investors certainty to be able to make investments in their economies. And when instability continues to remain the order of the day in African countries, investors will simply give them a pass and move on to those other geographies. And what we tried to do with Akiri was to basically just give economic actors and investors a very top-line summary of which African countries are doing well and which could be doing better, so that it helps and it informs their economic and business decision-making.
All right, Ikemese, thank you so much for that. I'm sure this is a conversation that a lot of countries and policymakers will be interested in following up. But thank you for sharing them with us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Well, back here in Nigeria, the reactions are still trailing the CBN's decision to unban the list of 43 items, with Naira falling to almost 850 Naira and more than 1,000 in the parallel market. Questions are being asked if the lifting of the ban has made any impact. Mr. Paul Alaje was on our Business Morning show earlier today and shared his thoughts on that.
Slowly. The solution to the current quagmire or the current crisis we have in FX window has nothing to do with the 43 items. The truth is that what is actually fueling this parallel market demand, there are some of them. One, Nigerians who feel that they are losing value in their money. They have no business holding dollar, they just want to hold it. And central bank as well as other stakeholders, we must sit down as concerned Nigeria and think about way forward to boost confidence of Nigeria in holding the Naira. So when we know the real problem, and we are not chasing what the world is telling us is right, because we are unique in our ways, our economy is unique, then we can solve the problem. And I can tell you, all the things I mentioned connote over 60%, about 62% from SPM research, about 62% of what is fueling parallel market demand.
So we head to South Africa now, where the South Africa's Minister of Finance, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, has described the country's current fiscal position as difficult. The country's budget deficit widened further in August and September compared to a year ago, as government expenditure continues to grow faster than revenue. However, Godongwana said that this does not mean that the country has run out of money. Meanwhile, some economists warn that the country is running out of money and facing a difficult time, and the situation may remain until the next 5 years. Well, running out of money or not, the question hanging over South Africa, but that's where we draw the curtains on Business Incorporated today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'm Ini John Mekwa. Enjoy the rest of your day.